August 23, 1914. The sun rose over the Belgian town of Mons, casting long shadows across the Mons-Condé Canal. In the pre-dawn mist, soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force, outnumbered, exhausted from their march, and positioned along a dangerously exposed salient, chambered rounds into their short-magazine Lee-Enfield rifles and waited. Within hours, the entire German First Army would descend upon them, and these men would demonstrate something the world had never seen: a bolt-action rifle that could match the fire rate of early machine guns. What the Germans were about to encounter would shatter their assumptions about modern warfare and reveal a truth that would echo through both world wars: that sometimes a 50-year-old design philosophy could outperform the most advanced engineering of its time. The story of why British soldiers could fire their rifles twice as fast as their German counterparts begins not on a battlefield, but in a workshop in Wisconsin, decades before the first shots of the Great War. It is a story of an overlooked immigrant inventor, a rifle system dismissed as outdated, and a tactical advantage so profound that it would shape the outcome of countless engagements across two global conflicts. By the time World War II erupted in 1939, the Lee-Enfield rifle would be, by most measures, obsolete, a relic from an earlier age, facing off against Germany's modern, precision-engineered Karabiner 98k Mauser. Yet British soldiers who captured German rifles in combat routinely discarded them in favor of their own weapons. The reason why reveals a fundamental truth about military technology. Theoretical superiority means nothing if it cannot survive the brutal reality of combat. The desperate problem facing the British Army in the late 19th century was one of firepower. The age of massed infantry formations was ending, replaced by dispersed skirmish lines where individual soldiers needed to deliver sustained, accurate fire. European armies were locked in an arms race, each seeking the perfect balance between accuracy, reliability, and rate of fire. The Boer War of 1899 to 1902 had exposed critical weaknesses in British small arms. Boer commandos, armed with German-designed Mauser rifles firing the flat-shooting 7x57mm cartridge and using fast-loading charger clips, had repeatedly outgunned British forces. The humiliation was profound and the lesson clear. Britain needed a better rifle, and it needed one immediately. Enter James Paris Lee, a man whose name would become synonymous with British military might, yet who was neither British by birth nor a professional gunsmith by training. Born in Hawick, Scotland, on August 9, 1831, Lee emigrated with his family to Canada in 1835, when he was just 4 years old. At age 12, while most boys were still playing with toys, Lee built his first firearm, a rifle fashioned from an old horse pistol from his father's collection. This early fascination with firearms would define his life's work. In 1858, Lee moved from Canada to Wisconsin, married Caroline Chrysler, a member of the family that would later lend its name to the Chrysler Corporation, and began seriously designing military rifles. Lee's first breakthrough came during the American Civil War, when he presented the U.S. military with a breech-loading vertical action modification of the muzzle-loading Springfield rifle. The U.S. Army was impressed enough to place an order for 1,000 rifles. However, a mismatch between the rifles Lee manufactured and the ammunition intended for them led to the order's cancellation after only 200 were produced. This failure might have crushed a lesser man, but Lee returned to his workshop with renewed determination. He understood something that many firearms designers of his era missed. A combat rifle needed to be designed not for the ideal conditions of a shooting range, but for the chaos, mud, blood, and terror of actual battle. In 1879, Lee's first commercial bolt-action military rifle went into production. His revolutionary design featured a detachable box magazine, a concept so far ahead of its time that it would become the foundation for nearly every military rifle that followed. By 1888, Lee's magazine system had caught the attention of British military planners. They adopted his design, initially pairing it with rifling developed by William Metford, creating the Lee-Metford rifle. This was replaced in 1895 by the Lee-Enfield, which used new rifling designed at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield Lock, London, that was better suited to the smokeless powder entering service. The Royal Small Arms Factory, established in 1816 on a 90-acre site in the far northeast corner of what would become the London borough of Enfield, had been created to reduce reliance on private contractors and ensure quality control of military weapons. By 1887, the facility employed 2,400 workers. In 1889, the factory began production of James Paris Lee's rifle system, and in 1895, the famous Lee-Enfield rifle was officially designed. The location was strategic, close enough to London for government oversight, yet far enough from the city center to minimize risk from the dangerous work of ammunition and weapons manufacture. What emerged from this collaboration between an immigrant inventor and a British government arsenal was nothing short of revolutionary. The Lee-Enfield system featured a bolt action that was fundamentally different from its competitors. While the German Mauser design, which would evolve into the Kar98k, featured a cock-on-close action requiring the shooter to push forward with significant force to compress the firing spring, the Lee-Enfield used a cock-on-open action. This meant that the act of opening the bolt both extracted the spent cartridge and cocked the firing mechanism. Closing the bolt required minimal effort, just enough to chamber the next round. This seemingly small design choice had enormous practical consequences. A trained rifleman could work the Lee-Enfield bolt with incredible speed, achieving a rate of fire that approached that of early machine guns. The battle of development was far from smooth. British military conservatives viewed Lee's rear-locking bolt design with suspicion. Traditional military thinking, heavily influenced by German engineering philosophy, held that front-locking lugs, like those on the Mauser, were inherently stronger and safer. The Lee system locked at the rear of the bolt, closer to the shooter's face, which critics argued was dangerous. Additionally, Lee's rifle featured relatively loose tolerances compared to the precision machine Mausers. To engineers trained in the German tradition of exactitude, this seemed like poor craftsmanship. The debate raged through military committees and testing boards, with influential voices calling for Britain to abandon the Lee system entirely and adopt a Mauser pattern rifle. The project nearly died in 1902, when a committee seriously considered scrapping the entire Lee-Enfield system in favor of a new high-velocity cartridge and Mauser-type rifle. But practical field testing revealed something the theorists had missed. The Lee-Enfield's loose tolerances made it more reliable under field conditions, not less. When caked with mud, sand, or ice, a Mauser's precisely fitted parts could bind and jam. The Lee-Enfield, with its greater clearances, kept functioning. Its rear-locking lugs, while theoretically weaker, were more than strong enough for the .303 British cartridge, and the design's real-world reliability proved superior to theoretical strength. The compromise that saved the Lee-Enfield was the short magazine Lee-Enfield, or SMLE, officially adopted in 1902 as the rifle number 1 Mk3. This revolutionary design unified the previously separate long rifle and carbine into a single universal short rifle just 44.5 inches long. It retained Lee's 10-round magazine, double the capacity of the Mauser's 5 rounds, and featured simplified sights and manufacturing processes. Most critically, it preserved the lightning-fast bolt action that would become legendary. The rifle went into mass production, and by the time World War I erupted, hundreds of thousands of British soldiers had been trained in a unique drill that would terrify German forces: the Mad Minute. British musketry regulations, specifically Practice Number 22, Rapid Fire, from the Musketry Regulations Part 1 of 1909, required every rifleman to fire 15 rounds at a second-class figure target at 300 yards in 60 seconds. The exercise was formally described as lying. Rifle to be loaded and 4 rounds in the magazine before the target appears. Loading to be from the pouch or bandolier by 5 rounds afterwards. 1 minute allowed. The target was 48 inches square, with an inner 12-inch silhouette representing the outline of a man's head aiming from a trench. 15 rounds was the minimum standard, a baseline requirement for every infantryman. Competent soldiers routinely achieved 20 to 25 hits. Elite marksmen exceeded 30. The record, set in 1914 by Sergeant Instructor Alfred Snoxall at the British Army's Musketry School in Hythe, stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in military marksmanship history. 38 hits on target in 60 seconds at 300 yards, with every single shot landing in the inner ring. Think about what this means. Snoxall was loading, aiming, and firing his Lee-Enfield, striking a 12-inch target the size of a man's head at the length of 3 football fields, on average every 1.58 seconds. This was not spray-and-pray automatic fire. This was aimed, controlled bolt-action rifle fire at a speed that defied belief. Another marksman, Sergeant Major Wallingford, had previously set a record of 36 rounds, and CSM Instructor C. Map achieved 35 and 36 rounds on numerous occasions after 1925. These were not anomalies. They represented what the Lee-Enfield system made possible. The German Kar98k Mauser, by contrast, was capable of approximately 15 to 20 rounds per minute with trained soldiers. The Mauser action, while extremely strong and accurate, required the shooter to lift the bolt handle, pull back against the extractor's powerful grip, push forward against both the spring resistance and the magazine follower, then push down with considerable force to compress the firing spring and lock the bolt. Each cycle required more time and more physical effort than the Lee-Enfield. The Kar98k's 5-round internal magazine meant more frequent reloading. In a 1-minute firefight, a British rifleman could put 30 rounds downrange while his German counterpart managed perhaps 20 at best. Those 10 extra rounds could represent 10 enemy casualties, 10 rounds of suppressive fire keeping enemy heads down, 10 more chances to survive. The enemy's fatal blind spot was rooted in German military doctrine and national character. German engineering culture prized precision, elegance, and theoretical perfection. The Mauser rifle embodied these values. Beautifully machined, incredibly accurate, with controlled feed that prevented double loading and a powerful extractor that never failed to eject even a swollen or damaged cartridge. German military theorists believed that well-aimed individual shots, delivered with Teutonic discipline and precision, would prevail over volume of fire. They were fighting the last war, the war of colonial expeditions and formal set-piece battles where marksmen picked off distant targets. They failed to anticipate the coming war of trenches, rapid maneuver, and close-quarters violence where the ability to deliver sustained fire would matter more than extracting that last half-inch of accuracy from a rifle. German military intelligence reports from before World War I acknowledged the Lee-Enfield's high magazine capacity and fast action, but dismissed these as the desperate expedients of an army that lacked discipline and marksmanship training. The implication was clear: German soldiers, with their superior training and superior rifles, would not need such crutches. This arrogance was about to be shattered along the banks of a Belgian canal. The reversal came with battlefield shock. At the Battle of Mons on August 23, 1914, the advancing German forces encountered something they were utterly unprepared for. The British Expeditionary Force, outnumbered by approximately 4 to 1, held a series of positions along the Mons-Condé Canal. When German infantry advanced in dense formations, as their doctrine prescribed, they were met with a storm of rifle fire so intense, so sustained, and so accurate that German commanders became convinced they were facing massed machine gun positions. After-action reports from German units described their shock and confusion. How could the British maintain such firepower? Where were they hiding all these machine guns? The reality was more remarkable than the German assumptions. The devastating fire came primarily from riflemen, British soldiers lying behind hedgerows, canal banks, and barricades, working the bolts of their Lee-Enfields with practiced speed. A British infantry section of 10 men, all firing at mad-minute speeds, could deliver 300 rounds per minute, the equivalent firepower of 3 or 4 early machine guns, but distributed across a wider front and far more difficult to suppress. The 4th Battalion, Royal Fusiliers, the 4th Battalion, Middlesex Regiment, and the 1st Battalion, Royal Scots Fusiliers held the Mons salient and delivered such punishment to German attackers that entire companies were decimated before reaching the canal. One incident captured in British after-action reports tells of a German cavalry officer with 4 troopers who rode through the morning mist toward a British outpost of the 1st Battalion, Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry. A British sentry with a Lee-Enfield shot the officer and 2 troopers before the survivors could retreat. 5 targets, 3 hits in the seconds it took for mounted men to realize they were under fire and attempt to flee. This was the standard British troops brought to the battlefield. Throughout the day, German assaults continued, and throughout the day, British rifle fire shredded them. By nightfall, 8 British battalions had held off 16 German battalions, inflicting casualties at a ratio that shocked German high command. The expansion and multi-role impact of the Lee-Enfield advantage rippled across every theater of World War I and beyond. In the mud of Passchendaele, where rain and filth rendered many weapons inoperable, the Lee-Enfield's loose tolerances and simple design kept it functioning. In the deserts of Palestine and Mesopotamia, where sand infiltrated every mechanism, British and Commonwealth troops maintained fire superiority over Ottoman forces equipped with Mausers. The rifle's reliability in extreme conditions became legendary. British soldiers developed a saying that captured the difference between their rifle and the German one. The Germans went to war with a hunting rifle, the Americans went to war with a target rifle, and the British went to war with a combat rifle. By the time World War II erupted in 1939, the Lee-Enfield was approaching 40 years of continuous service in some form. The short magazine Lee-Enfield Mk3 was clearly outdated, and British planners had been working on a replacement. The result was the rifle number 4 Mki, officially adopted in November 1939, though widespread production did not begin until 1941. The number 4 retained everything that made the Lee-Enfield effective while incorporating improvements learned from decades of use. The receiver was strengthened and squared off, simplifying manufacture. A one-piece charger bridge replaced the rounded design of the SMLE, making stripper clip loading faster and more reliable. The complex nose cap was eliminated in favor of a simple barrel band, and the barrel was allowed to free float, improving accuracy. Most importantly, the aperture rear sight was moved to the receiver, creating a longer sight radius and allowing even novice shooters to acquire targets more quickly than with the old mid-barrel open sights. Production of the number 4 Mki began at 3 British facilities: Royal Ordnance Factory Fazakerley in Lancashire, Royal Ordnance Factory Maltby in Yorkshire, and Birmingham Small Arms Company's facility in Shirley. Remarkably, despite designing the rifle, the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield did not produce number 4 rifles during the war. It was fully occupied with other production and repair work. By 1941, British factories were producing thousands of rifles weekly. Production expanded to North America, with facilities in Canada operated by Small Arms Limited and in the United States by Stephen Savage Firearms, producing a simplified variant designated the number 4 Mki* with a modified bolt release mechanism starting in 1942. Total production of number 4 rifles during World War II exceeded 4 million units. German forces, meanwhile, continued to rely on the Kar98k, which was essentially an evolution of the Gur-98 rifle from World War I, shortened to carbine length. The Kar98k was adopted in 1935 as Nazi Germany rearmed. It featured the same controlled-feed Mauser action that had served Germany in the previous war, chambered in the powerful 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge. The rifle was, by any technical measure, excellent. Its accuracy was superior to the Lee-Enfield, particularly at ranges beyond 400 yards. Its 7.92 mm cartridge had a flatter trajectory and better penetration than the British .303. German military training emphasized marksmanship, and German soldiers were generally good shots. But the fundamental limitation remained. The Kar98k's rate of fire was roughly half that of the Lee-Enfield. In the close-quarters battles that characterized much of World War II, the hedgerows of Normandy, the rubble of Caen and Arnhem, the jungles of Burma, this difference was decisive. A German infantry squad built its tactics around the MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun, with riflemen serving primarily to protect the gun crew and provide supporting fire. A British infantry section could generate withering firepower from rifles alone, with the Bren gun adding additional suppression. The difference in doctrine reflected the difference in equipment. German tactics had to compensate for their rifles' lower rate of fire, while British tactics exploited their rifles' superior cycling speed. Testimonials from soldiers who used both weapons consistently favored the Lee-Enfield for combat, despite acknowledging the Kar98k's technical advantages. British soldiers who captured German rifles in North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe almost invariably preferred their own weapons. The Lee-Enfield's 10-round magazine meant fewer reloads at critical moments. Its faster bolt action meant more rounds downrange when it mattered. Its loose tolerances meant it kept working when clogged with dirt, sand, or mud. One British veteran, interviewed years after the war, put it simply, "The Mauser was a better rifle for the range. The Enfield was a better rifle for staying alive." German soldiers who captured Lee-Enfields faced a different problem: ammunition supply. Using a captured enemy weapon meant carrying a different caliber of ammunition, which was rarely available in German supply chains. Despite this, photographs from the war show German soldiers, particularly late in the conflict, armed with captured British rifles. One photo from after the Battle of Arnhem shows German soldiers with No. 4 rifles captured from the British 1st Airborne Division, which lost nearly 8,000 men during Operation Market Garden. The fact that German soldiers would adopt a captured rifle despite the ammunition logistics challenge speaks to the Lee-Enfield's reputation. The psychological aftermath of facing Lee-Enfield armed troops affected German tactical thinking throughout both wars. After Mons, German infantry doctrine shifted to emphasize cover, concealment, and rapid movement to close distance before British fire could be brought to bear. In World War II, German after-action reports repeatedly noted the volume of British rifle fire and recommended suppressing British positions with artillery or machine gun fire before assault. The psychological impact worked both ways. British troops developed extraordinary confidence in their rifles. This confidence translated to battlefield effectiveness. A soldier who trusts his weapon fights more effectively than one who doubts his equipment. In the deserts of North Africa, the Lee-Enfield performed magnificently during the campaigns from 1940 to 1943. At the Second Battle of El Alamein in October-November 1942, British and Commonwealth forces armed with No. 4 MKI rifles broke through German and Italian lines in what became the turning point of the North African campaign. The rifle's reliability in sandy conditions gave British infantry a consistent advantage in firefights. In the jungles of Burma, where British forces fought Japanese troops from 1942 through 1945, the Lee-Enfield again proved its worth. The humid, vegetation-choked environment that caused many weapons to rust and malfunction seemed barely to affect the Lee-Enfield. The British No. 5 MKI, known as the Jungle Carbine, was developed specifically for this theater. A shortened, lighter version of the No. 4 that retained the fast action and 10-round magazine, while being easier to maneuver through dense vegetation. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, thousands of British and Canadian soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy carrying Lee-Enfield rifles. Photographs from Juno Beach, Sword Beach, and Gold Beach show soldiers wading ashore, rifles held high to keep them dry. In the brutal fighting through the hedgerows, the bocage country where every field was a fortress and every hedgerow hid German defenders, the Lee-Enfield's rate of fire provided crucial suppressive capability. British soldiers could lay down covering fire while their mates maneuvered, pump rounds into hedgerows and buildings where Germans might be hiding, and quickly engage targets that appeared suddenly at close range. The ability to fire 30 aimed rounds per minute meant that a British rifleman facing a German rifleman in a sudden encounter had, all else being equal, twice the firepower. In the mathematics of survival, this was a decisive advantage. The Battle of Caen, which raged from June to August 1944 as British and Canadian forces struggled to capture the key Norman city, saw some of the war's most intense close-quarters urban combat. In street fighting, where engagements happened at ranges of 50 yards or less and soldiers needed to transition quickly between multiple targets, the Lee-Enfield's combination of magazine capacity and cycling speed was ideal. German defenders, despite having excellent positions and fierce determination, found themselves outgunned in rifle-to-rifle engagements. The British eventually prevailed, though at terrible cost, and veterans of the battle consistently praised their rifles' performance. The enduring legacy of the Lee-Enfield extends far beyond World War II. Unlike most bolt-action military rifles, which were rapidly replaced by semi-automatic and automatic weapons after 1945, the Lee-Enfield remained in frontline service for decades. British forces carried Lee-Enfields in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, where they proved effective in the mountainous terrain and extreme cold that characterized that conflict. The rifle's reliability in sub-zero temperatures, where the cosmoline preservative in Kar98k actions could freeze solid, gave Commonwealth troops a significant advantage in winter fighting. The Lee-Enfield remained the standard British service rifle until 1957, when it was officially replaced by the semi-automatic FN/FAL. Even then, many Commonwealth nations continued using Lee-Enfields for decades. India, which had manufactured Lee-Enfields at the Ishapur arsenal, never adopted the number 4, preferring to continue production of the SMLE Mk3. Indian forces carried these rifles through conflicts with Pakistan in 1947, 1965, and 1971. Australia manufactured Lee-Enfields at the Lithgow arsenal and also never fully adopted the number 4, preferring the older SMLE pattern. Australian troops carried Lee-Enfields in the early stages of the Vietnam War. Perhaps most remarkably, the Lee-Enfield saw combat service more than a century after its initial adoption. During the Soviet-Afghan War of 1979 to 1989, Afghan Mujahideen fighters used Lee-Enfields supplied during earlier conflicts. The rifle's simplicity, durability, and continued availability of .303 British ammunition made them valued weapons. In the 2000s and 2010s, during the war in Afghanistan, coalition forces occasionally encountered Taliban fighters armed with Lee-Enfields, rifles that might have been manufactured 70 or 80 years earlier, still functioning reliably in one of the world's harshest environments. Law enforcement and paramilitary forces worldwide continued using Lee-Enfields even longer than regular military units. The Royal Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland carried Lee-Enfields into the 1990s. Police forces in India, Pakistan, and various African nations still maintain Lee-Enfields in their armories today. In Myanmar, the former Burma where British forces fought so hard during World War II, police and paramilitary units were photographed carrying Lee-Enfield No. 4 rifles as recently as 2016, more than 70 years after the rifles were manufactured. The rifle's longevity reflects the genius of James Paris Lee's original design. Lee died on February 24, 1904, a decade before his rifle would prove its worth at Mons, and more than a century before the last Lee-Enfield would fire in combat. He never witnessed the mad-minute drill that made his bolt action legendary. He never knew that his rifle would arm British forces in 2 world wars and countless smaller conflicts. But he had achieved what he set out to do: create a rifle optimized not for the shooting range but for the chaos and violence of battle. In that mission, he succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. The Lee-Enfield story is ultimately one about the difference between theoretical excellence and practical effectiveness. The Kar98k Mauser was, by conventional engineering standards, the superior rifle. It was more accurate. It had better penetration. Its controlled feed action was more reliable in preventing malfunctions. German manufacturing tolerances were tighter, producing a more refined product. Yet none of this mattered as much as the Lee-Enfield's ability to put more rounds on target more quickly. In combat, the side that shoots faster and more often, assuming reasonable accuracy, tends to win. The side that can keep shooting when their rifle is caked with mud tends to survive. The side that can fire 10 rounds before reloading instead of 5 gains precious seconds that save lives. There is a broader lesson here about military technology and innovation. Cutting-edge performance specifications matter less than reliability, ease of use, and appropriateness for actual combat conditions. The most advanced system in the world is worthless if it breaks down, or if soldiers cannot operate it effectively under stress, or if it solves the wrong problem. The Lee-Enfield solved the right problem: how to enable an individual infantryman to deliver sustained, effective fire in the brutal reality of modern combat. It sacrificed theoretical accuracy that few soldiers could exploit for practical rate of fire that every soldier could use. It accepted looser tolerances that offended engineers but that kept the rifle functioning when precision-machined weapons seized up. It prioritized the needs of cold, frightened, exhausted soldiers fighting for their lives over the aesthetic preferences of ordnance boards. The rifle also demonstrates the importance of long-term thinking in military procurement. The British Army's decision to persevere with the Lee-Enfield design despite criticism, to continuously refine and improve it rather than chasing the latest innovation, paid enormous dividends. The institutional knowledge accumulated over decades of Lee-Enfield production and use gave British armories the ability to rapidly scale up production when war came. Soldiers trained on SMLEs in World War I needed minimal retraining to use the No. 4 in World War II. The rifle's legendary reliability was earned through decades of field use, refinement, and improvement. There is something to be said for evolutionary improvement of a proven system rather than revolutionary replacement. For the men who carried Lee-Enfields into battle, the rifle was more than a weapon. It was a companion, a tool of survival, and a source of confidence. British veterans speak of their rifles with an affection rarely heard in discussions of military equipment. They remember how the bolt felt in their hands, worn smooth by thousands of cycles. They remember the distinctive crack of the .303 cartridge and the substantial kick against the shoulder. They remember reloading by feel in the dark, fingers finding the magazine opening without conscious thought after countless repetitions. Most of all, they remember that their rifles worked always reliably without fail, even when everything else was going wrong. When Sergeant Alfred Snoxall demonstrated his record 38 shots in 60 seconds in 1914, he was showing what the Lee-Enfield made possible, not what it demanded. Most soldiers never achieved such speed. They didn't need to. Even an average rifleman could fire 25 aimed rounds per minute with a Lee-Enfield, and that was more than enough to establish fire superiority over opponents armed with rifles half as fast. The genius of the design was not that it enabled superhuman performance from elite marksmen, though it did, but that it elevated the performance of ordinary soldiers. It made every private a threat, every section a formidable firebase, every company capable of generating machine gun-level volumes of fire without machine guns. As the sun set on August 23, 1914, at the Battle of Mons, British forces began their long retreat. They had held for a day against overwhelming numbers, inflicting disproportionate casualties, but the strategic situation demanded withdrawal. The Germans had won the field, but they had learned something that would haunt them through 4 years of war. British infantry could shoot. Over the coming years, through the Marne, Ypres, the Somme, Passchendaele, and the 100 Days Offensive, German forces would encounter that same devastating rifle fire again and again. A quarter-century later, a new generation of German soldiers in different uniforms carrying updated versions of the same Mauser rifles would learn the same lesson in the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the hedgerows of France. The 50-year-old rifle design they faced had lost none of its effectiveness. Today, more than a century after James Paris Lee's death, and more than 120 years after the first Lee-Enfield rifles entered service, the design's influence persists. Modern military rifle development still weighs the same fundamental trade-offs Lee navigated: accuracy versus reliability, precision manufacturing versus field durability, individual shot excellence versus sustained fire capability. The rise of semi-automatic and automatic rifles has changed the equation, but the underlying questions remain. And somewhere in the world today, in a police armory in India or a gun safe in Canada or a collector's home in Britain, there is a Lee-Enfield rifle that still functions perfectly, still shoots accurately, still embodies the principle that James Paris Lee understood so well. A combat rifle need not be perfect, it need only work when everything depends on it. That is the legacy of the rifle that fired twice as fast as its more modern rival and, in doing so, helped shape the outcome of the 20th century's greatest conflicts.